I was a new student at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, going into my junior year. Not knowing anyone was really rough. Everyone already had their friend groups. They had them figured out. The worst part was lunchtime. My school wouldn't let juniors leave for lunch, only seniors. So I had to eat in the cafeteria. I was dreading it. I knew I'd have no one to sit with, and I didn't want to force myself into a random table. When lunchtime finally came, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray of food, looking for somewhere to sit. Every single table was taken. I didn't even have the option of sitting alone. But there was one table, in the far corner of the cafeteria, with only 2 kids sitting there. It felt like the least intimidating option. So I walked over and asked if I could sit there. They looked at each other. Then one of them said, "Yeah." When I sat down, I noticed something strange. They were identical twins. They looked like they were partially of Hispanic heritage, but they didn't have accents. They honestly seemed normal. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno. We talked for a while. Then they invited me to hang out with them after school. And honestly, I figured why not? I had to start somewhere if I wanted friends. I got their numbers. After school, I went home to drop off my stuff. Not long after, I got a text from Bruno. He said he and his brother were planning on hanging out. He told me to meet them around 9 o'clock that night, at the nearby cemetery. It was only a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot near there, and since it was Friday, we didn't have school the next day. I had nothing to do. So I said yeah, I was down. When the time came, Bruno texted again, asking if I was still coming. I told him yeah, that I'd leave in a few minutes. We confirmed we'd meet on the road by the cemetery. He said yeah, so I started walking. Alone, in the dark. The longer I walked, the more I thought about being the new kid, about moving, and about the fact that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to meet 2 kids I had just met that day. Eventually, I reached the small road next to the cemetery. I texted Bruno asking where they were. He replied almost instantly. He said they were in the woods, by a small lake, and that they wanted to show me something. Then he sent his location. I stepped off the road and into the trees, pushing branches aside, using my phone flashlight as my only light. I started calling out their names: Antonio, Bruno. According to the location, I was close. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, quiet, approaching me. I stopped walking. They were definitely footsteps. I called out again, telling them they better not be trying to scare me, but no one answered. That's when I decided this was stupid. I turned around and started walking back toward the road. That's when the footsteps changed. They went from slow to fast. Before I could even react, someone's nails dug into my neck, tight, sharp, cutting off my breath, and I heard a familiar voice scream, "Grab him, grab him." I broke free and ran. I sprinted toward the road. I knew they followed me until the tree line, but I was faster. I could run for miles, and that night, I did. I ran straight home and told my parents everything. They considered calling the police, but I thought it would be better to take pictures first. Pictures of the nail marks still visible on my neck. The next day, we reported everything to the school. That's when the texts from Bruno became important. Because of those messages, the school was able to identify both students. Within days, the twins were expelled. My parents made me block both of their numbers. I didn't argue with that. They also wanted to know if the twins knew where we lived. I told them, "Not as far as I know." About a week later, something else happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, and my room felt freezing cold. Unnaturally cold. I could hear the wind. It was blowing directly into my room. I slowly looked toward my window and realized it was completely open, wide open. I wondered if my mom had opened it, but that made no sense. It was barely 50 degrees outside. I walked over to the window and looked down. Just a few feet below, there was a small ledge, part of the exterior of the house that stuck out beneath my window. My dad always told me to jump onto it if there was ever a fire. I shut the window, then walked down the hallway to my parents' bedroom. I gently knocked. My mom asked, half asleep, "What is it?" I asked her if she had opened my window. She sat up immediately. No. Why? I told her again. This time louder, more panicked. My window had been opened by someone. She shook my dad awake, told him to come check my room with us. But when he finally woke up, he told me to grow up and go back to sleep. I left their bedroom door open as I walked back down the hallway. That's when I noticed something. Something I still don't know how I caught. My bedroom door was no longer fully open. It was half shut. When I had left, it had been wide open. I slowly pushed it, just enough to look through the crack. I didn't really expect to see anything, even though the thought crossed my mind. I never imagined it would actually be true. There was someone standing behind my door, hiding. I screamed. I screamed for my dad as loud as I could. My door suddenly slammed shut, just as my dad ran down the hallway. I kept screaming. "There's someone in my room." He burst inside and flipped on the light. That's when we saw it. A leg, disappearing out my window. My dad ran to the window, then downstairs, then out the front door to chase them. A few minutes later, he came back, out of breath. He said he didn't see anyone. Deep down, I knew who it had to be. The twins. The ones I got expelled. My dad called the police. When they arrived, I had to explain everything, from the incident in the woods to what just happened in my bedroom. My father backed up my story, but without proof of who actually entered the house, there was nothing they could do. They told us to lock all doors and suggested installing cameras outside. To this day, I'm certain it was one of them, or maybe both. After that night, I spent months sleeping in fear, but nothing like that ever happened again. Looking back now, I don't know why I was so willing to meet strangers in the woods, at night, on my very first day of school. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have realized, back in the cafeteria, that they looked like trouble, and I should have stayed away. Freshman year of high school, 2007, gym class, last period of the day. We had a substitute gym teacher. It was one of the stormiest days of the year. He was an older man, not elderly, but gray-haired, maybe 55, 60 at most. When he took attendance and passed by my name, he did a double take at me. I remember feeling uncomfortable, not to flatter myself, but I always knew I looked older than my age. I had been told many times that I didn't look like a freshman. The substitute told us to get into our volleyball teams. Then he disappeared down the hallway by the locker rooms. 40 minutes passed, the period ended. It was time to get changed and go home. When I went into the locker room, my locker wouldn't open. For some reason, the lock wouldn't turn. I tried my combination again, and again, and again. Nothing. Eventually, I had to tell the substitute. I figured maybe the combination had just slipped my mind. He told me to give him a few minutes, and that he would get the list of locker combinations. I waited outside the office. When he finally came back, he was holding a book, open to a specific page. Without saying anything, he walked into the girls' locker room with me. I didn't expect that. The locker room was almost empty now. Only one girl was still inside, finishing changing. He walked over to my locker and tried the combination written on the paper. It didn't work. No matter how many times he tried, each time it failed, he would look at me and laugh. I forced myself to laugh too, just to be polite. That's when it started getting weird. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll figure this out." He tried the combination again, his hand still resting on my shoulder. It didn't open. Then I felt it, his hand slowly sliding from my shoulder down to my lower back. I immediately pushed myself away and grabbed my bag. I told him I was late for my bus. He tried the combination one more time. This time, the locker opened. He smiled and walked away. I waited until I heard the locker room door shut. Then I quickly got changed. That's when the lights went out. The entire room went dark. I pulled my pants up, shoved everything into my locker, threw on my backpack, and started walking toward the back exit of the locker room. the one that led outside. I was terrified that he would be waiting for me. Something about him felt wrong, predatory. When I reached the end of the aisle, I stood at the intersection of 2 rows of lockers to reach the exit. I had to turn left, but instinctively, I looked right first. There was only a small amount of light. It leaked in from a single rectangular window near the ceiling. It was just enough light for me to see him, peeking at me from around the wall of lockers. That's when I ran. I sprinted for the exit door. Behind me, I heard him say, "Wait, wait, wait. It's not what it looks like." I ran outside, into the rain, off the high school campus. I walked the rest of the way home, soaking wet, with nothing but time to think about what had happened. By the time I reached my house, it hit me. He had probably changed my locker combination, on purpose, just so he could be alone with me. As for what he might have been planning, when he shut off the lights, I never wanted to imagine it. I was too emotionally scared, and honestly, too embarrassed to tell anyone, not even my parents. It was something I kept to myself for years, because truthfully, I still don't feel comfortable telling people about it. When I was in high school, I was in the band. My school band was basically an easy A. It was either that, orchestra, or chorus, so I went with band. Our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had the grading system set up so that as long as you attended class and completed your weekly lessons, you got an A. Sadly, toward the end of 1 quarter, I was missing 2 lessons. Because of that, my grade dropped to a B. After class, I went up to him and asked if I could make them up. Even though he seemed reluctant, he said he would let me come in during a lunch period and practice in one of the downstairs storage rooms to get credit for a lesson. I was more than happy with that, because realistically, I would probably just play games on my phone instead of actually practicing. The next day, during lunch, I arrived at the music room. I grabbed my saxophone and headed down the stairs outside the music room, toward the basement area of the music department. It was always kind of creepy down there. Absolutely no one went down there except the music teachers. The lights were terrible. I had only been down there a couple of times before that day. The hallway stretched out in front of me, and on either side were a bunch of doors. Each one led into a small room, maybe 7 by 7 feet. They were used to store chairs, music stands, spare instruments, Christmas decorations, and whatever else didn't have a place upstairs. I stepped into one of the rooms and shut the door. I set my sheet music on a stand, just in case Mr. Nicholson came down to check on me. But honestly, I had no intention of playing. I sat down and started playing games on my phone. Then suddenly, darkness. Complete darkness. The room went as black as it could possibly get. Even my phone screen was the only thing I could see. I looked over at the light switch instinctively and flicked it up and down a few times. Nothing. I stumbled as I stood up and opened the door, only to find the hallway just as dark. I held my phone out in front of me to give off what little light it could. I think I had an iPhone 3 back then. Those old phones didn't even have flashlights. Still, that tiny glow was enough. Near the end of the hallway, I saw one of the doors open. And then I heard something being dragged inside that room. Something heavy, like one of the large plastic storage containers. Then came the breathing. Fast, manic, followed by low animal-like grunting. A moment later, a large plastic container was pushed out of that room and into the hallway. The second I saw that, I turned my phone screen off. I quietly stepped back into the room I had just been in and shut the door. I don't even know what I was thinking, why I chose to hide instead of run, but the strange sounds, combined with the sudden blackout, made the hallway feel unsafe. Whoever it was, they were blocking the stairs, and of course I had no reception down there. All I could think to do was sit in that small room and wait for the lights to come back on. Minutes passed. They didn't. Eventually, I decided I had to try getting back upstairs. I slowly opened the door again, holding my phone out in front of me for light. I stepped into the hallway. I inched a little closer toward the stairs, and then I heard something again. I immediately slipped into the next closest storage room and quietly shut the door behind me. I still didn't know what I was hiding from. Could it have been a staff member? A janitor? The only reason I thought it wasn't was because they only appeared after the lights went out. I stood in that room in complete darkness, not moving, just listening, waiting. You know that feeling, when someone is in a room with you? Even if you can't hear them, you can sense it. That feeling suddenly washed over me. My hand was shaking as I lifted my phone. I pressed the home button, just for half a second. That was enough. Someone was standing in the corner of the room, only 3 feet away from me. I pretended I hadn't seen anything, but it was already too late. Something broke the silence. A hand tapped my shoulder. Twice. Then it began squeezing. I panicked and lunged for the doorknob. I struggled to find it in the dark. When I finally did, I yanked the door open. The man inside the room tried to push it shut again, but I was already gone. I ran up the stairs and burst out onto the main level of the music hall. The lights were still on up there. I ran straight to Mr. Nicholson, completely out of breath, and told him everything. He immediately called security. They checked the basement area of the music hall. When they came back upstairs, they said that aside from some music equipment being moved around, there was no one down there. For the rest of the period, Mr. Nicholson canceled his flute lessons. I sat in the room with him and 5 flute players, explaining the entire story in detail. There were no cameras in the music hall, so there was no way to identify whoever had been down there, or who had shut off the power. Security believed the person was likely trying to steal expensive music equipment, and God knows what else. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to give my statement, and after that, the rest is history. One night, my friends and I hatched a genius plan. We decided we'd sneak into the high school basement through one of the windows. It was broken and never fixed. The thing about this window was that you had to hop a short metal gate that surrounded the outside staircase leading down to the basement. Not that it would actually stop anyone, but it added that extra barrier, the kind that makes you feel like you're really doing something wrong when you cross it. We made sure there weren't any security cars nearby. Then we hopped the gate. Crawling in through the window proved difficult. We had to boost ourselves up and squeeze through an insanely skinny opening. But once we were in, we were in. We kind of dispersed from each other, exploring different areas. One thing was clear right away. The basement of the school was a mess, and honestly, anything but interesting. There was very little light. One small white bulb glowed in a far corner. The red exit sign actually produced more light than you'd expect. I was looking around when I saw one of my friends in front of me. He leaned in and whispered, "Let's go upstairs." So I followed him. He pushed open the door leading into the main hallway of the school. Everything was dark. I always thought at least some lights stayed on at night, but no, not a single one. As far as I could see, the only thing visible were the glowing red exit signs lining the hallway. We walked down the hall together. I remember whispering, "Dude, this is really creepy." He replied back, trying to sound calm. But then I realized he was right to be nervous. Who knew if someone else could be inside the building, besides my friends and me? Little did I know, someone was. I followed my friend into the bathroom. He went into one of the stalls. I whispered, "Hurry up." I waited. After a moment, my phone started ringing. I answered it. It was my friend Chris. He said, "Where the hell did you go?" I told him I was upstairs with either Roland or Brandon. There was a pause. Then he said, "What do you mean? They're with me." Immediately after, both Brandon and Roland said hi, right there on speakerphone. My mouth went dry. I started to say the word "I," and then my brain completely stopped working, because that's when I heard it, laughing, coming from inside the stall. It was not the laugh of any of my friends. Slowly, I looked up. There was someone peering over the top of the stall, standing on the toilet, watching me. I screamed, "Holy!" over and over into the phone as I bolted out of the bathroom. The moment I exited, I heard the stall door slam shut behind me. I tried to run back to the basement. In total darkness, it wasn't easy to find, but somehow, I managed. I screamed my friends' names as I ran down the stairs. When they answered, I yelled for them to go. One by one, we jumped off some kind of bucket onto the window ledge and crawled back outside. I was the first one out, terrified that whoever was in that bathroom was following me. When we were finally all outside, I explained everything, out of breath, laughing nervously now that I felt safe with everyone beside me. But then, we noticed something. We must have been loud, because when we looked back at the school building, in one of the downstairs windows, someone was standing there. Their hands were pressed flat against the glass. You could only see half of their face. I whispered, "That's got to be him." Roland didn't hesitate. He yelled for us to get the hell out of there. We ran until we were completely off school property, and that was that. We came up with a lot of possible explanations, but none of them really made sense. One thing was certain, though. We never did anything like that again. I was home alone a lot as a kid. My mom worked overnight shifts as a nurse and my brother was away at college. One weekend night, a girl I liked came over. Her name was Molly. We watched a couple of movies before she had to leave. Less than 10 minutes after she walked out the door, I heard a chair scraping across the deck outside my bedroom window. I looked down. Someone was sitting in one of the chairs. I called out Molly's name thinking she'd forgotten something. The person looked up at me. It wasn't her. I backed away from the window immediately. I texted my friends thinking maybe one of them was messing with me. None of them were. When I looked again, the man was still there, staring up at my window. I shut off the TV and hid in my bed. I didn't even turn my phone screen on. I was afraid he'd see the light. After several minutes, I checked again. He hadn't moved. When I asked him what he wanted, his shoulders began shaking. He was laughing, no sound, just wheezing breath. Then he tried the back door, then the front. I was 14 years old. If the doors hadn't been locked, I wouldn't be alive today.